Hi, good morning, friends. I know a lot of people have joined the Indian Air Force as they were highly passionate about flying. But Air Force is not just about flying, but more importantly, about fighting. When we talk of fighting or aerial combat, it demands something very special, as now we are talking about fighting in three dimension or in an open sky, which has its own threat of anti-aircraft guns and also the surface to air missiles. During such an act of bravery, it is just the will and sheer determination which can safeguard our nation's boundaries. So today, we will rewind the history and see how a young flying officer shot down the first Pakistani Sabre jet during the Indo-Pakistan War of 1971. Yes, I'm talking about Air Marshal Harish Masand, a decorated war hero who is also the most celebrated MiG-29 pilot of the Indian Air Force. On behalf of all the viewers, I welcome Air Marshal Harish Masand to talk about his most glorious event which took place almost around 50 years back. Good morning, sir.
Jain, Rakesh, how are you?
All well, sir. Fourth December was most heroic day as he shot down the first Pakistani Sabre jet, after which the full-fledged war of 1971 started. Sir, can you describe the 4th December morning as you taxied out in your favorite Hawker Hunter aircraft with barely 240 hours of flying experience?
I was in Hasimara in 37 Squadron. I'd been there since 4th of December 1968, exactly to date when I got posted in. And I had just about barely 4 years of service when the war started. And like I said, just about 240 hours on the Hunter because you may recall that, after the 62 war, there was a big bulge of people inducted to the Air Force to expand. And we were we were the last of that lot. So at one time in our squadron, we had 52 pilots against an establishment of 20. And I was 35th in the seniority list. So you can imagine the kind of flying we got with the same number of aircraft, and the Hunter was getting old as it is. So with that, there was a lot of struggle for me to get flying and get my operational status on the aircraft. So when the war started, actually, I had just about that much time. But I must place on record that because there were so many people in the squadron, a number of youngsters in the squadron, the standards required by our seniors were very, very high. And they were very strict with what we did. And if you made a mistake in flying in the initial portion itself, you were immediately, there were no quarters given, actually. You were just so, sometimes in the air, I've heard leaders saying, all right, go back and land. That's it. We didn't continue with the exercise because the guy couldn't perform. And later, these guys were sent out to ATC duties or ground changes or into helicopters or something like that. All kinds of things happen. So people, shall I say, the seniors were very choosy because there are a large number of people to train and choose from. There was a Flight Lieutenant David DeBras in the squadron who soon left after the war. He quit the Air Force and moved off. But as luck would have it, I hadn't flown in the squadron after joining the squadron in 1968 for almost 8-9 months. So with a lot of struggle after going to my CO with Wing Commander Rusty Sinha, with 2 resignations actually, because I actually went very politely to say that, sir, since you have so many pilots and you don't need people and we're not getting flying, why don't you let me go back? And I have no regrets or or rancor against anybody because I was doing engineering before I joined the Air Force.
Okay.
And having flown fighters for a little bit, I felt, if I wasn't going to get enough flying, it's time to move on and get back to my original profession and, with this experience under my belt. So I actually requested him to let me go twice. And he kind of, Rusty was, because I was number one in the course and I'd done well. So he didn't want to let me go and set an example like that. So he actually flew me on the ground, sent me solo because there was no trainer. Literally after a break of 7-8 months, I hadn't flown at all at that experience level, you can imagine. Okay. He just said, all right, you're confident of going solo? I said, yes, sir. He said, okay, go with a chase. And the second sortie after this handling trip that he gave me after so much of a break was with this flight lieutenant Duplas.
Okay.
And he was cool. And, he kind of just sort of said, all right, we'll do this, do that. And within that second sortie itself, he actually took me through paces where people with, I would say, 50 or 100 hours do.
Okay.
He got into tail chase and combat in the third sortie with me to see where I stood. And if I couldn't hold my own, he would have just thrown me out. It's only after those initial couple of sorties that David now started relaxing with me because he realized that I had some potential.
Okay.
And he sat down with me and started then teaching me.
Okay.
Till then, just testing me, quite frankly. But it was, so the training standards were high and we had, shall I say, though I had less number of hours, I would say my confidence in the aircraft was, like everybody else who had flown through us, was pretty good, very high. We had total confidence in the aircraft and we felt that we could fly it to its limits and do everything. And as luck would have it also, before the war started, I was my CEO, Wing Commander Suppi Paul's permanent wingman. He had taken me on, as a permanent number 2 to him. And from about October onwards, Suppi and I had started going into East Bengal inside to do photo reconnaissance missions because our hunters in 37 Squadron were modified with Winton cameras. So the squadron, Suppi and I think, did about 8 or 9 missions before the war started, with the last mission being in support of General Sagat Singh, you may have heard of him, in Comilla, in that sector, as late as 2nd of December, from which we came back from Gundam only on the 3rd and the war started on the 4th.
Sure.
So 4th morning or 3rd evening when the Pakistanis attacked the airfields in the west, and we heard it on the radio, and soon the message came that the war is on now, for which we'd been on standby for almost 6 months by then. We were kind of, shall I say, we anticipated. So there was excitement, but there was no fear or the unknown or anything like that. So with that, in any case, youth is a bliss, ignorance is a bliss. We really didn't know what war meant, that age and level. So we went in, like that. So that morning, I was slated in a mission, the very first mission of the war, Mission 501, for an attack on Dhaka, Tezgaon airfield in Dhaka, with Suppi Kaul as my leader. There was a flight lieutenant, Billu Sangar, who was his number 2, who was an instructor but been attached to the squadron, for the war. Sure. Squadron leader Alan Mascarenhas as the number 3, and I was the youngest, so I was number 4 in that formation. 4 aircraft, low-level strike against Tezgaon airfield, Mission 501, and we were carrying 4 100-gallon drop tanks on the aircraft, and just the internal guns, because the Hunter at that level, low level in the profile that we were given by command, didn't have the capacity to carry any other ordnance. It had to carry all 4 tanks just to get there. As a matter of fact, Tezgaon airfield at that low-level route was exactly, I still remember, 181 nautical miles from miles, not kilometers, from Hasimara. And our calculated range or radius of action of the Hunter was 167 nautical miles. So we, with combat fuel, of course, some reserves for combat. So we were in that configuration actually going 14 nautical miles beyond our calculated range and 14 nautical miles coming back, which is 2 minutes going extra and 2 minutes coming back. So we had completely exhausted our combat reserve that we were supposed to keep. And we had also cut down into part of our diversional fuel in case we had to divert after coming back, if the runway was blocked or something. So frankly, we were instructed by command not to engage sabers, and they would provide MiGs from Guwahati as cover for us when we reached Tesgaon to take on any threat from sabers at that time. And our rendezvous or RV was right over Tesgaon airfield because the MiGs were coming in from Guwahati to Tesgaon, and we were heading from Hasimara to Tesgaon. So we were supposed to meet over the airfield as we pull up actually for the attack. Now, quite frankly, Rakesh, over here, when this mission profile had come as early as, I would say, June 1971, and when we went on standby 15 minutes in anticipation of anything happening in this configuration, I had actually raised this issue in the squadron to say, why are we going at low level with just guns? Because it doesn't make sense. You go all the way, you have no combat fuel, and with guns, when you pull up over Tesgaon, where are you going to find the sabers on the ground that you were supposed to attack? Just like, and I've given the example that in Hasimara, the vegetation in the east, the vegetation is so thick that you could actually drive by on the taxi track and miss an aircraft in the hard standing on your side. You couldn't see it. So from the air to spot these aircraft would have been very difficult. So I'd actually asked this question, do you expect the Pakistanis to line up the aircraft for you outside on the tarmac so you can pick them up? So why are we going at low level with just guns? And particularly in view of the number of squadrons that we had against the Pakistanis, they had only one squadron in Tesgaon of sabers. We had actually 11 fighter squadrons, but taking out everybody for different tasks that the NATs were not used, they didn't have the range. MiGs were on ORP duties and some of the MiGs. Also some aircraft have to be kept for the Chinese threat from the north. I would say that we still had about 6 squadron worth of effort available against East Pakistan at that time in the offensive air operation mode. So I had argued that why don't we have such numerical superiority? Why don't we go at medium and high level, 15 or 20,000 feet, and carry bombs? And then if the sabers come and meet us in the air with such numbers and with MiGs and Hunters and other aircraft mixed up, well, we'll dump our bombs and fight them in the air and shoot them down in the air. If they don't meet us in the air, they refuse to come up because of the large numbers that are going, then we will just go into steep dives and bomb the runways out of commission, basically. Unfortunately, I was a flying officer, remember? And these were command people who were, laying out the plan. So I was told to just take it easy, young man, that kind of stuff, so take it easy. So we went like that. Anyway. So this was the background actually as to how we went, because when you hear the whole engagement later, you won't understand it unless, or one won't understand it unless you know the student background. Then, so on fourth morning when we went to the aircraft early in the morning, our TOT was time over target was 0705 hours Indian Standard Time. In our takeoff for that distance was planned at 6:30 our time. So we went to the aircraft around 6 o'clock and started up at 6:15, and I must mention here that, those days a flight sergeant or chiefy was the boss of the technical You could have technical officers, but quite frankly, Chiefy was God. He was literally the guy who controlled all technical operations, and he was a fairly senior person. And we youngsters used to literally treat him with a lot of respect.
Okay.
And somehow, because I'd been the adjutant of the squadron for almost 2 years out of these 3 that I'd been in the squadron, I'd got to know the men very well, and Chiefy Chaudhary, and since I was doing some operations before that, along with Supi, before the war actually commenced, Chiefy Chaudhary and I had a pretty good relationship, and he was very fond of me, frankly. I used to respect him like almost a very elder brother or father figure, to be honest, that kind of thing. So when I reached the area, Chiefy Chaudhary gave me my favorite aircraft, BA-291, because this is the aircraft which had camera modification done, and I had taken this aircraft for most of my recce missions inside East Pakistan earlier, and we had always come back without a scratch. So it was like a good luck charm. Chiefy also knew that I preferred this aircraft. It flew well. It was my good luck sort of mascot or whatever. So he gave me 291. And so Supi the CO started as the leader. We were in different pens, different outstanding, so not in contact with each other except on the radio. His aircraft didn't start. So he jumped into a standby aircraft that was available and took that. Maskey, the number 3's aircraft, had a hydraulic leak as he started. So he had to switch off. So we were only now 3 left. Supi, Billu, and I. So I moved in as the number 3, being the youngest though. And we took off on time.
Okay.
Even 291 let me down that day a little bit, for whatever reason. Because as soon as we took off, and I was in trail behind, I was the last to take off, trail behind Supi and Billu ahead of them, and wanted to catch up with them and get into formation, the brief formation. In the Hunter, there used to be a button on the left, which we had to press in to raise the landing gear or undercarriage. Now that button just wouldn't go in. I couldn't press it for whatever reason, locked in the out position. So my undercarriage remained down for quite some time. And I kept trying it, it won't go in. And in the meantime, Billu and Supi had accelerated and, they were literally disappearing far away. But fortunately, the visibility was good. I was young, I could keep them in contact and keep trailing them behind. And finally, I decided to use an override button, which in the Hunter, on the right combing, there was an override button for the landing gear, which was not meant to be used except in an emergency. And I thought an operational mission was an emergency, obviously. So, because the problem with that override was that if you used it to raise the landing gear, there was no certainty that the landing gear would come down when you came back to land. It may not lower. But I didn't want Supi and Billu to go as 2 aircraft out of 4, can you imagine, with sabers probably lurking around there, or whatever threat we had. I didn't want to miss out on my first mission. I didn't want them to go as, understrand. So I used this override, and luckily the NCAS went up and I caught up with Supi and then got into formation, the correct formation with them. Now remember, because of this, undercarriage being down and me at low speeds, for a lot of time, for some time, I had burnt more fuel than I would have otherwise if I just cruised along. So I was getting lower and lower on fuel as it is. So when I caught up with them, Supi and Billu were on the right in fighting position as we keep, and I was abreast of them left, about 1,500 yards on their left. And we cruised along at low level on the given route or the planned route, which was almost direct actually, and beautiful visibility, etc., etc. So as we got into the plains of, after clearing the Tura hills and that area, a little higher ground, and we got into the plains of Bangladesh, initially we saw all the rice fields and everything else. and people on the ground looking up at the aircraft. We could see it because we were that low. But so slowly there was a little layer of early morning mist or low cloud that forms, and we were right on top of it because we couldn't go below it naturally. It was too low, literally hugging the ground. So we were cruising along on top of this mist, and because of that, we were, from anybody who was slightly higher than us would have seen us against the white background for miles actually.
Okay.
So we went along. As we came closer to our target, Tesgaon, and the initial point that we chose for running, the mist had cleared to a large extent. There was only a slight thin layer maybe, which you could see through the ground, and almost clear. And that is the time as we set course from the initial point, which was like 2 minutes away from the target, Tesgaon, and accelerated from 360 knots, at which we were cruising, to 420 knots. I spotted two sabers on the right, 3 o'clock, 5 miles, slightly high, so to see us. And quite frankly, if you can see it, if we were here on the left, these guys were coming in from the right in a turn, as if they were being guided by radar to intercept us, apart from visual. Beautifully turned. From 5 miles, they fell kind of in a smooth turn behind us. So I reported this to Supi and the leader, basically. 2 sabers, 3 o'clock high, 5 miles, turning in. Because we were briefed that the MiGs will take care of the sabers if we were attacked, and we were to continue with the attack or return and disengage, Supi immediately called up the MiG leader. I think his nickname was YNA, Young and Handsome, some squad leader Behel, who was in that squadron there in 4th Squadron in Guwahati. I didn't know him, Supi knew him. So he called up, I think YNA, if I remember correctly now, and said, we're being bounced. And so YNA said, Supi, where are you? So, because they were reaching Dhaka from a different direction, we were converging on Dhaka from 2 different directions. So we didn't have visual contact. So this, where are you between the two, was carrying on the RT. And in the meantime, the sabers were coming in beautifully and running up behind us. And so the lead guy settled behind Supi and Belu at about 2,000 yards, 2,500 yards initially. And the trail guy, saber, came behind me, the second guy. And I could see him in the mirror once in a while and by craning my neck. He was a little further than the lead guy. So while this conversation was going on, the saber slowly closed into about, the lead saber closed into about 2,000 yards. But by then I think also instinctively, perhaps Supi had come up on the throttle a little bit, maybe I just to keep up with him automatically without any calls. I was also. So we were almost hitting 480 or 500 knots. We had accelerated even beyond that 420. And so the saber wasn't catching up really because, that was its ultimate sort of thing. So at about 2,000 yards, the lead saber, dropped his tanks actually, as it happened, to clean up the aircraft and catch up with us. And I saw a whoosh of, a swirl of white fumes or fuel or whatever it was. Initially, when I saw that little cloud or swirl below his aircraft, my immediate thought was that he had fired a Sidewinder missile. Because by, we'd been told by intelligence that they were carrying, the sabers had been modified to carry these Sidewinder missiles, which we didn't have. So while at low level, I knew at that particular level from Vietnam War and the reports that had come in a little bit, intelligence that these Sidewinders were not very effective at low level. All the more, there was no waiting now because, just in case the missile hit somebody. So I immediately ordered a hard right, which is the maneuver to evade missiles and things like that. And later I realized it was not the Sidewinder, it was the fuel. But instinctively, I just ordered tactical action and said, so we hard right. And we went to a hard right. Now you can imagine if I draw a diagram, I'm on the left, he's on the right, and we turn, right. At 90 degrees or so, or just under 90 degrees, I would cross Supi's rear at 1,500 yards and go under, and he would disappear under my belly, right? The idea is this maneuver is basically to, if the saber sticks with Supi, then he will come in front of me and I will be able to shoot him down. So the idea is to threaten. This is the tactical action. So obviously the saber didn't want to get into that kind of a sandwich, as we call it. So he moved left towards me and crossed me, and I carried on with my turn because there was still a guy behind me. And in any case, we've been told to disengage, not to, we didn't have the gas to fight actually and get into combat. So the idea was to just turn around. And so I called up Supi crossing 6 o'clock behind him, rolled out on 350, which was the course to get home, and look for me on your right. So on 350, when I rolled out, I expected Supi and Balu to be on my left at that point, and for them to clear my tail against the second saber in case he had kind of, hung on to me. I couldn't see him because I was focusing on the lead saber. At that moment, I didn't see the second saber anywhere. So when I looked on the left and I was looking on the left for them, I didn't see anybody. There was nothing on the left 9 o'clock abreast of me at least. There was nobody there. And no calls. So then I looked, further back and ahead and high and low. So further back at about 7:30, that means literally at my extreme left on the left, I saw two hunters in the same battle formation, the Supi and Balu were in, right? Turning right, but more like if we were on a northerly course, 350 for me, their course must have been, say, westerly or southwesterly, so less than 270.
Okay.
So they were on 240, 250, somewhere in that range. And both of these guys were turning right in a very gentle turn with a saber behind them at 400 yards firing at them. Because I could see the puffs of black smoke coming from the saber's nose. So I knew that was the machine gun firing. So I yelled, literally on the RT, Supi, turn on right, because they were turning very gently, and he's firing at you. And immediately, I forgot about all the instructions now, because my responsibility was to save my own CO, Supi call, and Balu from the saber. So I immediately from there forgot about disengagement and forgot about everything else. I went into a hard left turn climbing, towards them, and then reverse right immediately, and fell behind the saber in a jiffy, literally, because of the kind of training that we had got from people like David DeBraz and the others, because he used to be very good in teaching me all this. Based on the initial bits that I had gone through, I had formulated for myself what I used to call a theory of paths. Quite frankly, this is something that I don't need to write down, but I taught this to all my pupils later. The idea was in the air, there are no roads, there are no lines, there is nothing you can make out. So you have to imagine the path of the other aircraft and your own, and imagine where he will be in the next 10 seconds or 5 seconds or 20 seconds that you want, and where you're going to meet him. And so it used to work beautifully in our exercise called ranging and tracking. We used to have an exercise called ranging and tracking, which taught us how to get behind, how to stay behind somebody, and then range and correctly track with the sighting marker called the pipper on the cockpit there, and range by putting his wingspan and encompassing his wingspan and inside the gyro gun sight. And the gyro gun sight calculated the lead angle or the deflection angle, because while like a duck shoot, if you've been shooting anywhere in a 12-bore skeet range, you have to fire ahead of the target a little bit, because the time the bullets take to meet the target there. So in aircraft which are flying at high speeds, this was calculated by a gyro gun sight for us, and we had to just track and keep it there. Then automatically you lay off that much lead ahead of the air. So I found myself, by maneuvering like this, I found myself beautifully placed at 400 yards, which is the correct firing range behind the Sabre. My ranging and tracking perfect with my paper on his cockpit and ready to fire while talking to Supi. And I must admit, I pressed the camera button first for a fraction of a second, maybe, I just pressed it and left it, because in training, what we do is when we get into this kind of a setup, we take a film and come back and say, hey, I shot you down, to prove that my ranging and tracking was correct. I did exactly that in war because of force of habit. For a second, of course, very fraction of a second. And immediately I realized that I was an idiot. I cursed myself, lowered the gun trigger, which is in front of the stick, right? And by then, because I was at higher speeds than these two guys, they were turning lazily, and I was inside the turn also and all that. I was closing in on this Sabre pretty rapidly. So by the time I lowered the gun trigger and got in there, I would say 100 yards or less from the Sabre, somewhere there in that range, very close. It was huge in front of me. Oh. At this time, when I reached there and lowered my gun trigger, the Sabre, I think, must have been worn by the second guy behind me, or he may have seen me himself in his mirror. I don't know. He suddenly tried to break off from the attack by reversing to the left in a sharp reverse. Okay. I was so close and closing in so fast that I just forgot about the gyro gun sight or whatever. So I could have hit him with a stone, actually, to be honest. I just put the cross, which is the fixed aiming marker, on his spine just below the cockpit and fired. Right. And I just kind of pressed the trigger as I pressed the trigger, he blew up in front of me, literally, because we were so close that the bullets didn't take any time to hit him. And we were carrying high explosive 30 millimeters, a huge cannon shell of the Aiden gun. So I just pressed the trigger and he blew up. And I had no time to avoid the explosion or the debris or whatever. And kind of just instinctively went into the center of the explosion and flew through it, right, quickly. So, and I obviously, in my excitement as a youngster, I said, I got him. Excited, kind of, I got him in that way. And immediately the MiG leader, YNA, whoever he was, by then had come closer and probably seen this explosion. And he said, yeah, I see him. He's ejected. Okay. So he confirmed that the guy had ejected. Now I immediately, because Supi and Bilu, what I thought was Supi and Bilu in front of me, and the Sabre behind them. And I went into a hard right now because we're running out of gas. And I told Supi, I said, continue right, hard right, and roll out on 350. And I cut inside their turn again so that I will come out abreast of them. And we'll go home, because we're running out of gas. Now I go on to 350 looking for the other Sabre behind me and looking for this guy and everything happening in a hurry. And when I roll out on 350, I saw nobody again on my left. Nobody. And RT silence, totally. Nobody's saying anything to me. Supi's not talking to me. He didn't say a word. I was kind of perplexed. Now I knew I was running out of gas. I also knew there's another Sabre behind me somewhere. So I maintained my speed reasonably high for a minute or so. And then because I was running out of gas, I just kind of zoomed up to almost 17,000 feet or something. And got into range speed quietly and kept looking at my mirror to see there's nobody behind and came home. And calculating all the time whether my fuel will, enough to get me home, frankly. Anyway, I got home, fortunately, from reciprocal runway, direct landing, with gliding literally with idle power from 15, 17,000 feet, and called up Hasimara and said landing. And I didn't know where Supi and Billu were at this time because there was no RE contact.
So,
So landed and got back into the dispersal. Chiefly, now by then Supi and Billu had already come back.
okay.
What had happened, which we figured out later, actually in this confusion and in the war, what had happened was that when I gave the hard right, Supi and Billu turned right, and I don't know how, where I missed them, but they went home.
Okay.
They returned home.
Oh.
Okay, I turned probably harder than them or whatever. We were not correctly placed. I didn't see them. They didn't call. They didn't see me. They didn't see any sabers.
Oh.
And they came back without a bullet hole or scratch. I must tell you, I mean, Supi's radio failed, as he says, Billu and Supi, both at the same time, as they went into a hard turn.
Okay.
But both were quiet after that. They couldn't hear me, or they heard some of my calls, but they couldn't talk to me.
Okay.
That's what they said. So, anyway, but what we figured out was that there was a 17 squadron formation, which was whose TOT was 0707, 2 minutes behind us.
Okay.
Same target, same from Hasimara.
Oh.
Now, when we turned right, obviously this 17 squadron formation, which had Squadron Leader Lele, the flight commander of 17 Squadron.
Oh.
17 Squadron was a sister squadron in Hasimara, Hunters again. Squadron Leader Lele was the leader.
Oh.
Number 2 was a guy called Flying Officer Buster Baines, who was my coursemate, very dear friend of mine, and things like that. So Buster Baines. Number 3 was Flight Lieutenant Vinod Neb of 65 war fame, right? Veer Chakra from there. And number 4 was a Flight Lieutenant Bajwa.
Okay.
Now, obviously, these 4 aircraft had, instead of being 2 minutes behind, had come closer because they were faster or whatever, navigation error, they were closed in on us slightly. So when we turned the initial hard right, they obviously were around the same area and under us, or left or slightly left to right, and they went through, right? At this time, obviously, the Sabres were either controlled by radar or whatever, realized that we had taken tactical action.
Okay.
So they left us and went for Lele and Baines.
Okay.
Now, so therefore, the guy I shot down was firing at Baines actually.
Okay.
Lele and Baines. And Baines came back with and landed just a minute behind me, maybe half a minute or 1 minute behind me, in 17 Squadron, with 48 bullet holes in him.
Okay.
Right? But fortunately, they were not HE shells that they were using, machine guns, 50.50 or whatever they were using. They were solid ball ammo. Okay. So these bullet holes were there. His hydraulics had packed up. He was in manual. His instruments were shut up. He didn't have many of the electrical or the other pressure instruments. But it was daytime. But the engine was working and the aircraft was flying. So he came back with these 48 bullet holes and recovered the aircraft. Okay. Now, and he heard all these calls, mine, saying I got him and he's ejected. And when I got him, he suddenly found that his aircraft had been stopped. I mean, his aircraft was not being hit anymore. And somewhere he saw me maybe turning inside and whatever. So he came back, and as he came into the dispersal with this stricken aircraft, damaged aircraft, and switched off, he said, "Oh, Kape." My pet name used to be Kape in Hasimara. Oh, he said, "Kape shot the Sabre behind me." He told everybody immediately. Okay. So we got the news within 5-10 minutes, and we exchanged notes, Buster and I, and he called me up and thanked me or whatever. So that's how we got this guy. Now the chiefy told me, as I got off, of course, gave me a big hug and they cheered me and lifted me on their shoulders, the men, and Squadron Nanda Karyappa used to be the CEO of the helicopter 111 HU helicopter squadron there, ME4s, and he was also officiating as the station flight safety officer. So he came to pick me up in his jeep and so kind of brought me back to the dispersal, to the flight complex from the dispersal of the standing. And so Chiefy told me a little later, saying, "Sir, you know how much gas you had left, and how much fuel you had left?" He said, "Only fumes. You just about made it. I didn't have gas to go around to another circuit or divert or do anything. Lucky." Okay. And then he told me, he said, "You had only 18 rounds total. 18 rounds from 4 guns at a firing rate of 20 rounds per second meant less than a quarter second burst or less than 5 rounds per gun." So luckily, because the Sabre was so close, even one bullet, one HE high explosive bullet would have been, or cannon shell would have been adequate. But 18 hit him. Out of 18, maybe 10 hit him, 12 hit him. I don't know. But he just blew up. So, and that's when I stopped. So it was just a press of the trigger and it was over. I mean, now you can call it, shall I say, bravery, heroism. I personally feel it was God. Okay. I was fortunate because I was so young and so ignorant that it would have turned either way. Now, let me show you, if you can see it. Can you see a helmet over there? I used to always have "God is my co-pilot" written on my helmets from the day I started flying as a cadet in the Air Force.
After having flown very many photo recce missions since April 1971, when for the very first time you spotted 2 Pakistani Sabre jets, what was your reaction, sir?
Well, I'll put it this way. Like I said, we've been waiting for something to happen for 6 months almost. No, the things that started happening in East Pakistan in end of March 1971, and you know the political history. I will not go into it. But by about May or June, we'd been put on standby, and just in case there's a war or likelihood of a war because of all the refugees that were coming in and the problems and things like that. And we used to be in standby. So it had become, you know, what shall I say, a routine. We were literally sitting in the squadron half a day on shifts, 4 of us, sleeping in the crew room in RG suit and everything ready to take off within 15 minutes notice, not like a scramble for air defense in 5 minutes, but 15 minutes for a strike mission with 4 aircraft parked there. So, and we'd gone over this many, many times. So, and then from October, like I said, you know, I started going with Supicol inside. So that fear, or shall I say, the doubts in terms of what can happen and where. As a matter of fact, because of all my previous, shall I say, leanings towards the Air Force and why I joined the Air Force and why I joined fighters and things like that, I was always looking for a dogfight. You know, those were the kind of, you know, looking for, shall I say, more than one saber, to be honest, you know. During the war, I mean, if we get into a war, I must engage into a dogfight, which is classic dogfight of those days, not like the BVR, beyond visual range combat of today with firing missiles at someone you don't even see and maybe hit him or not hit him. But yeah, this was a classic dogfight, you know, and this is what we were training for. So I was looking forward to it. And like I said, youth and ignorance are bliss. Yeah. Initially, you don't realize you know, till the first engagement, let me be very honest. Till the first engagement that day, I didn't realize that I could be the guy shot at.
Yeah, correct.
And it was a question of what? It was a question of 100 yards behind or 100 yards ahead by mistake. I mean, could have made a mistake like I did with the camera button. Let's say I had not realized the mistake immediately and the Sabre had been able to get me in front, I would have been in trouble. And you do all these actions actually that you take in war initially and even later are instinctive. It's through your training. you don't think, there's no time to think in combat in the air because the whole thing was over in what? Shall I say from the initial heart rate to the shooting down would have been less than a minute
Yes.
total, perhaps, in that range, the few seconds, few calls, quick reaction. So there's no time to think or worry or do anything. You're just instinctively doing what you're trained to do.
True.
And our training was like that. And it's because of the training that I pressed the camera button. So
True.
later when I became senior in the Air Force, I used to tell all my young people, I said, this is the mistake I made, but I survived and won.
Oh,
You can't make this mistake tomorrow in war. So your switches and your selections and your actions must be, so well practiced that even in the stress of combat, you don't forget anything. You just do it as a mechanical person routinely and go through this practice yourself. So once I saw the saber in the air, I mean, I was not thinking of anything but, shall I say, particularly after the initial heart turn when I saw the second time. First time we were told not to engage and come back because let's say I had run out of fuel and ejected by engaging in combat and ejected over East Pakistan somewhere, I couldn't make it home. I would have been thrown out of the Air Force perhaps or court-martialed or something for violating orders. Let's be honest, because those were not the orders. It's just that I happened to shoot down the saber and still come back somehow without a scratch on my aircraft. That command and my CO and everybody else gave me a pat on the back and I won whatever I could. But it could have gone the other way around. But again, I'm saying in the air, I was not thinking of these things. In the air, the moment I saw the saber firing at these two aircraft, which I thought were Supi and Billu, my instinctive reaction was, do or die, I have to save them. Even if it means that I get hurt or something happens.
yeah.
Right? I just have to go and rescue them. And because these are my buddies, I mean, these are my own squadron, you fly for that.
True.
So I went for that.
Okay.
Once I shot him down and came back, and I was flying back, odd thoughts did go through my mind at that time because I had time to think. But mostly my thoughts were on checking my fuel all the time, checking the map to see how far I was, to get home and things like that. So it's only when I came back to the crew room that this thought hit me that I'd been in combat.
Okay.
Till then, actually, there was no thinking of combat. It was just that, and it's only after I landed and came back to the crew room and had my cup of tea and lit my pipe or whatever to get a puff quickly, that I realized that I started thinking as to what could I have done to keep the second guy also somewhere. Did I have the gas to engage him? All these thoughts have been recurring to me over the years. Actually, I've been thinking about it. Could I have done anything better? Could I have done something different, which would have got me both the guys instead of one? And if not me, somebody else that I could have controlled to hit the other guy. As a team, basically. I was thinking that. Let me also tell you, Rakesh, very honestly, this was winter, 4th of December. Now, Hasimara and that area doesn't get freezing cold, but it's pretty cold. It does get cold. But when I landed from the sortie and got out, my entire G suit was soaked with sweat. It was wet, sticking to my body, all over. It was literally soaked with sweat. So you imagine in that 1 minute of combat, how much sweat, came out, despite the air conditioning of the Hunter being very good. Let me tell you, Hunter air conditioning was good, unlike MiG-21s at low level. So despite being comfortable, my body, the heat of combat and the excitement made me sweat that much. So you only think of this, actually these things in hindsight later. And then you realize what the consequences are. But even then, because we were young and, at that time, it didn't worry me, we carried on. with life. I mean, we didn't worry that next time you may be shot, or you may be hit by ACAC, or anti-aircraft gun or something, and we lost. Let me tell you that on 4th of December itself, we lost 2 aircraft from our squadron, 2 people, both fatal, gone. Squadron leader Samantha, who was in our squadron, who was in formation a little later over this now, got by, as per the Pakistanis, he was shot by a saber right overhead. As per our reports, by his number 2, he was hit by ACAC, the anti-aircraft. But I feel the Pakistani guy in his book, in hindsight, has explained it much better and more convincingly that yes, it was a saber who got Samantha, and Samantha was never seen again. His aircraft was never seen again. He died. Another guy who got hit by anti-aircraft as he pulled up over Tezgaon soon after we came back and landed was a Flight Lieutenant Khonde. And he was also attached as an instructor to our squadron back. He was an ex-37, gone for instructor's course, came back, and he was flying with us in the war. And the first mission of the war, we lost him. So those 2 losses apart, for which you felt bad, it only made your resolves firmer to say, we must continue the fight and win. Whatever task given to us, we must win. Luckily, thereafter, we didn't lose a single aircraft in the war. As a matter of fact, on 5th of December, the next day, some sort of, shall I say, reasoning prevailed in command, and they realized that, what we were doing on the first day was not quite the best way of doing it. So they sent 8 hunters, 4 from 37, Supikol and me in the same formation that I described earlier, and 4 from 17 Squadron, Wing Commander Chatrat, the CEO of that squadron, leading. And together we went 8 aircraft, hoping that the Sabres will engage us in combat in the air. And I was looking for a second, shall I say, another one if I could, to be honest. But they never came and engaged us because they must have seen 8 aircraft on the radar, and they must have said, logically and correctly that there's no point engaging such a large force. So they didn't come up, and I never saw another Sabre in the air because by 6th morning, we had started 5th night itself. We had started bombing their runways, which we should have done from day 1. So the Sabres were grounded in any case after that. Yeah, so looking back at the whole event and the war, not just the 4th of December, but all the missions I went through, including the attack on the governor's house on 14th of December. At that time, shall I say, we did it in isolation based on the orders given to us from command and wherever. We didn't have the entire picture of how it was going, except for the larger picture of how the war was progressing, what were the objectives, and how we fought in different places, how the army moved, etc. Except for whatever little briefing the GLO, Major Tripathi, used to be with us, gave us. So we knew that much at that time. Over the years, I slowly started writing about these small episodes and published these articles. And more important, I then started reading about the entire war in various books and publications as to what happened. Today, at 50 years, when I look back, my aim is to actually not look at just individual operations, but to analyze the entire war as to what happened, how did we do it, did we do it right, and can we learn something from it? Because actually, after a war, we should do that, to analyze it, to say, because even in the best of victories, you can find things that you can improve on, or the mistakes that people may have made, and how to overcome them in future. That's the way I look at it. That's the way I've been writing. As a matter of fact, in this Golden Jubilee year, and before that also, they asked me to write a chapter on the offensive air operations in the East because I was involved. And that required me to, I had already read up a lot, starting with Air Chief Marshal Lal's book on his experience as a chief in the war in 71. and many others, General Jacob from the army, and even General Niazi from Pakistan. I read his book, right? When he talks about the betrayal of Pakistan, basically, when he talks about his version of the events. The idea being his official, not the official, but so-called official history of 71, which has not been published except by these two people called Thapliyal and someone. It's a book, big book, which I read through all this to try and connect the pieces and the jigsaw puzzle of what actually happened all over. And my intent in this chapter that I wrote for Center for Air Pass Studies has also been not just to, shall I say, pat myself on the back on the individual contributions that I made or individual contributions of other people and their experiences, though those on the side, but the larger picture of how it all went and how we all did this. And this is to analyze it and to draw lessons from it of our own squadron, for our own people, as to where we went wrong. What could we have done better? So my message to everybody would be that even if you win, analyze it, debrief yourself, and see where you could have done things better. I mean, I mentioned earlier, if you remember, that even today, what bugs me is, could I have done this engagement of 4th December better?
Sir, in times to come, there'll be very many brave pilots like you who, in a demanding situation, will choose to fight rather than to think of safe return. What would you like to say to those future warriors of the Indian Air Force?
I would say the first thing is to obviously master his own craft. He has to first be a master in what he is doing or what he's supposed to do. That means the aircraft he's flying or maintaining or whatever he's doing, wherever he is part of that team over there. And two, thereafter to start thinking of better methods of employing this whole thing. Better methods and suggesting it to commanders, because it's not necessary that the commander knows everything. It depends on people who are in the field, actually, who have hands-on experience. And today's youngsters are, I think, far more adept at adopting technology and new technology in their ways and methods and usages than some of us old-timers were. Let's be honest. I mean, we had to learn how to get onto the computer. I mean, there were no computers in our time. I mean, it became difficult for us initially. Today, we are doing Zoom meetings and doing all this kind of stuff. You're doing so much with Photoshop and, animation or whatever. Today's youngsters are, they find it actually very easy for themselves because they've grown up with this kind of technology. So quite frankly, I would say the youngsters have a very, very big responsibility in advising the senior commanders on how to employ this technology better, how to incorporate it into a doctrine and strategy. And that can only come if they read a lot and write their views. Because to keep yourself, I mean, I'm guilty of that also. In the early days, I should have written far more than I did, should have. That was not the culture at that time, actually, to write these kind of things. Today I'm writing, yes, but we should do it at that time, really.
Thank you very much, sir, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, and Jai Hind. Thank you, Rakesh.
Thank you, sir.